Hey, it's Alicia from mobilitymastery.com, and today I want to talk to you about the connection between low back pain and pelvic instability, including hip instability specifically, and your gluteus medius becoming inhibited. So the first thing I want to ask is, did you know that you actually have more nociceptors? In common English, you might call them pain receptors, but that's not scientifically very accurate. I'll describe that in a second. But you have more nociceptors in your low back area, specifically within the thoracolumbar fascia. That is like a thick sheath of fascia in your lumbar spine, primarily, or in the low back region, not just the spine. You have more of these nociceptors there than anywhere else in your body. And low back pain is the most common pain complaint that physicians hear worldwide. And it's honestly almost as common as the common cold. So low back pain is extremely universal. It is the most common pain that humans feel. Why? Well, it makes sense to me because we have all of these nociceptors there. So what is a nociceptor? A nociceptor is a nerve receptor that is designed to detect potential threats to a given area of the body that it's responsible for assessing. And if it detects a potential threat to that part of the body, it sends a signal or a message to the brain. And then the brain has to determine if the threat is credible or not. And if it is credible, then it has to do something about it. And sometimes that means giving you a pain signal. So the brain gives you, the consciousness inhabiting your body, a pain signal so that you can actually take care of the threat. But where the pain is rarely the problem. So this is my theory about why we have so many nociceptors in the low back and why back pain is so common. So the human brain, I believe, would rather you be in pain than dead, and it will prioritize spinal stability and a fluid, free, communicating central nervous system, which is housed in your spine above just about anything. So if your spine becomes compromised for any reason, then your central nervous system is in danger of becoming compromised. And if your brain isn't able to communicate with your body, which it does through the central nervous system, then you would die instantly. So your central nervous system exists in your spine from your cervical spine to your lumbar spine. It's housed there, and then from there sends nerves and communicators throughout the limbs, right? So we have a peripheral nervous system in our limbs, and those sensors or nerves are communicating in the peripheral nervous system. They bring messages to the spine, and then it has to go from the spine to the brain. So this is why, in my opinion, the brain will always prioritize a healthy, fluid, free communicating spine or central nervous system above anything, and it would rather you be in pain than dead. And the reason you have so many nociceptors in the lumbar fascia is because that lumbar fascia sits just above the seat or the roots and trunk of your spine, which is your pelvis. So we've got two hips, one on each side. We've got the lowest part of your seat, your pelvic floor, and then your spine has to sit on top of all of that and be able to be fluid and communicate effectively, right? So if your pelvis or your hips become destabilized in any way, so if one hip is kind of like hiking up above the other, if you're in an anterior pelvic tilt of any kind, whether it's both sides or just one side, or even a posterior tilt. So we've got people with flat back, we've got people like me with lordosis, we've got people with a neutral spine, who, maybe even though visually it looks neutral, your brain has detected a potential threat and it's in compensation, but you're getting that pain signal. So that thoracolumbar fascia sits right there where it can detect a potential threat right away because it's more likely that you're going to be destabilized back here than in the front, where you've got organs and all kinds of other things, right? The spine is more in the back. It's not in the middle of your body. So that is my assessment of why we have so many nociceptors in the low back and why low back pain is related to pelvic instability. But what I want to talk about right now are the ways that low back pain can manifest and how each of these types of low back pain suggest a potentially unique situation or unique type of pelvic instability and potentially even glute inhibition. So what the heck is glute inhibition? If you don't know what that means, it means that one of your glute muscles, so your butt muscles, which are primarily responsible for stabilizing your hips, including especially your gluteus medius muscle, those muscles need to activate on command through things like standing. So just standing here right now, my gluteus medius should be activating for me to keep my hips stable while I'm standing, because if my hips aren't stable, my spine's in danger just standing here. So you really need a strong, stable base from which your spine can, extend up and communicate to the brain. So if I have glute inhibition, my glute's not able to fire on command through something like standing, walking, running, lunging, squatting, jumping, so many things. Doing yoga, pretty much anything that requires hip stability, which is most human movements, right? Even sitting, to some extent, you need to be able to sit upright and sit in such a way that your spine feels stable, or you may end up getting a pain signal just from sitting too much. But sitting too much can cause pelvic instability when you're tightening up the front and the back is getting elongated. And that could be one way that your glutes actually turn off and become lazy glutes. Now, most of the time, I would actually say that these poor glute muscles are overworked neurologically, meaning your brain has sent a command signal to perhaps the gluteus medius muscle to contract neurologically back here to stabilize your pelvis so that your spine has a strong base, right? But if it's contracted neurologically, meaning your brain has commanded that the glute muscle just stay like this all the time, then it's not available to fire on command through all the activities I just mentioned. So now we're in a glute inhibition scenario. It's getting asked to actually do a job that it's not meant to do all the time, and other muscles are going to have to compensate. So this is where you're going to get a really tight feeling low back potentially. Your erector muscles might start popping out a lot and getting hyperactive to keep your spine as stable as possible, given you have lack of glute activation. That is one potential cause or scenario that you might encounter. But another is, for me, for example, I have kind of a lordotic spine. My front is actually getting overstretched, and my deep core doesn't activate. So my deep core is actually inhibited by my low back fascia getting really tight from this lordotic position. Now, I don't have any back pain. I never really do. So I'm in a slightly different scenario than you if you're watching this video and you have low back pain. But I have a form of pelvic instability that has led to knee pain. So pelvic instability can cause all kinds of issues, from plantar fasciitis to knee pain to hip pain and low back pain. But this video is meant specifically to be about low back pain. So whether you have sciatica or some kind of soft tissue low back pain, so maybe you feel pain in your QL muscles or the soft tissue on one side of your back or across your back, whether you have tailbone pain or hip pain, posterior hip pain, so like pain in your glute, if you literally have a pain in your ass, that's one form of hip pain, or glute complex low back pain. If you have pain in the side of your hip over here, that may be a different scenario, but more than likely that also is related to pelvic instability or hip instability. So how the heck does the pelvis become unstable? Well, it's going to be primarily through the activities we perform and the fact that we live very asymmetrical, not perfectly bilateral lives, right? Like, we're not even left to right 100% of the time. We like to lean on one hip or one leg a lot, especially those of you that have kids. You might hold them on one side. Maybe every time you go hiking or trail running, you step up with one, leg. That's your strong leg. Maybe if you're doing CrossFit, you're doing a squat or an Olympic lift and you're actually shifting over to your strong side. Because here's the thing, while you intend to be getting stronger and building muscle through something like a squat or an Olympic lift, your brain is going, I don't want this human to die right now, so I'm going to use the strong leg to get out of this compromising position to my spine so I don't die. So your brain is always prioritizing you being alive over fit, over strong, over, being the way you want to look. So your brain's going to always prioritize that you're alive over all those other things. So hopefully that makes sense from, the perspective of pelvic instability about how you might end up with low back pain as a result of being destabilized there. But it's these imbalances left to right that cause some form of pelvic instability, compensation. So your glute could compensate, your low back can compensate, your core can compensate, and you might end up with flat back. You might, some of these things might be a result of the gait that you have. But in the case of low back pain specifically, we have to map mostly the thighs, but the lower body. So I think of the legs, I think of your legs as like your roots if you're a tree. Your trunk is the trunk, and then up here are your branches. So if you have roots that are not very, rooted into the ground and they're crooked, then your trunk is going to be crooked, and then your spine's crooked, and your branches are going to be weird, right? So we really want to be, as humans, rooted into the ground from the bottom up, and most of the time, in the case of low back pain, it's going to be the fascia in your legs that is actually causing that back pain there. So here's the takeaway that I really want you to have today for low back pain specifically. Remember at the beginning of the video, we talked about all those nociceptors that you have in your low back. Well, their job is to detect threats to the spine, right? And then get your attention by potentially, or get the brain's attention first, right? And then the brain might compensate first. So it might say, well, hey, I have a gluteus medius available, and I have an adductor available, and I have a calf available, and I can do all these things to compensate because the human that owns this body is running and hiking and insisting on doing all of these things, even with a compromised spine. So the body can compensate and compensate and compensate. It's amazing at compensation, but it can't compensate forever. So by the time you're getting a pain signal, often it's like, I give up. Human who owns the body, you have to help. And that's the pain signal. But this area right here is simply detecting a threat. It's not, the problem probably isn't here. It's in the roots, and it's in that base that is your pelvis. So your pelvis is made up of your hips, the pelvic floor, and that deep core here. So this is your base from which you should have a strong, fluid, supple spine that's able to, the way I like to think about it is you want to be like a tree that can bend in the wind and not break. So you don't want, so much rigidity and compensation to keep you stable that you can't even bend, right? So we want a fluid, supple spine and trunk so that you can bend and not break, right? But those nociceptors are just detecting the threat. The threat is actually below in your legs. So how you figure out the cause of your low back pain is actually going to be the way you figure out your pelvic instability scenario. So low back pain specifically is, if you want to solve it at the root, is solving pelvic instability because you're going to be mapping your left quad against your right quad, your left adductor against your right adductor, your hamstrings, your IT bands, and you're going to figure out where are you out of balance, where have you overused one side, right? Are you in a tilt this way, an anterior tilt, a posterior tilt? Is one hip hiking up while standing and apparently lower when you're lying down, because that can happen. But what is exactly causing this instability here? So solving pelvic instability includes the same thing that you would do to solve low back pain most of the time. I don't want to leave you with nothing to do in this video, so I want to point you to a few things that I would do to get some acute relief. And right now I want to talk about acute relief versus long-term elimination by really going after the root cause. So you can get some acute relief for low back pain by releasing your quads and your quad hip flexors and your adductors. Those are my 2 or 3 primary areas. So when you do your quads, I would recommend going into your quad hip flexors as well. And then when you do your adductors, do the whole thing from your knee to your groin area. And then the primary thing you have to do is map or figure out which side is actually more adhesed and tighter, because if you don't figure that out, you're probably going to end up in some kind of pain management scenario. But here's the kicker. If your gluteus medius is not firing and you're simply taking care of these kind of acute causes, you could cue that muscle to start firing again on its own, kind of unconsciously. It might happen. It does happen for some people, but you might actually have to figure out if your glute is inhibited, how to activate it again, and then how to leapfrog your way to complete resolution so that both glutes are firing left and right, your deep core is activating for you, you're no longer imbalanced left to right, and you've solved this in a really holistic way, and you know how to move, whether you're a hiker or a runner or a CrossFitter, you know how to move in ways that aren't going to compromise your spine. So really solving it for good has to kind of involve all those things, because if your glute still isn't firing, it doesn't really matter how much fascia release you do, you're in pain management. You haven't solved it for good. And I always want you to solve pain for good. I don't like managing pain. I don't want you to manage pain. I want you to be able to manage a pain-free body and actually take it to optimization so you can feel better than neutral. So I encourage you to search out the quad and adductor and hip flexor techniques that I have on this channel. We'll provide the links for you so it's easy, so you have no excuses below in the description box. But if you want to actually take a deep dive with me on pelvic instability and glute inhibition, specifically those 2 things and how they're so often related, I invite you to sign up for my free training on problem solving, pelvic instability, and glute inhibition. We're going to give you the link for that also below in the description box below this video. So make sure to sign up for that if that sounds interesting to you, if you're really committed to solving your low back pain at the root. And just to be clear one more time, just about every low back scenario I can think of is involved in some kind of pelvic instability scenario. So I'm talking SI joint pain or dysfunction, tailbone pain, QL pain, bulging discs, herniated discs, compression, so disc compression or degeneration of the discs back there. There's a reason they're getting compressed. There's something going on in the base or the trunk that's causing the spine to become compromised. Glute pain, hip pain, right? All of these things, sciatica, all of these things, piriformis syndrome, they just keep coming. All of these things are most of the time, in my experience, a result of pelvic instability, and a lot of them have to do with glute inhibition as well. So if you want to take that deep dive with me, make sure to sign up for my free training on that with the link we've provided below. I hope this was really useful for you. Make sure, if you get some acute relief, but it keeps coming back and keeps coming back, that you keep in the back of your mind, oh yeah, Alicia said it might be pelvic instability and I might have to solve that to get out of pain for good. So I hope you get some acute relief today, and I hope you get long-term relief by going after the root cause. I'd love to hear your thoughts below this video. So please share any takeaways or any thoughts you have on low back pain and its relationship and connection to pelvic instability and glute inhibition. And I'd love to also get any questions you have for me on this topic because it's a huge topic. I'm really passionate about it. It's involved in so many different pain patterns, not just low back pain, as I mentioned before. So please post those as well. And I'd love to hear from those of you that believe you have some kind of pelvic instability and glute inhibition scenario. So those of you that feel certain that's your problem, please post your questions and comments below and I'll come talk to you because I want to help you solve this for good. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and I'll see you next time.